Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episode 3 of season 4 of The Walking Dead, Killers. And an interesting thing about this episode, it was written by Robert Kirkman, who of course is the author who created The Walking Dead. Now, honestly, for the most part, I was actually right up until the very end a little disappointed with this episode. This is, for the most part, a very slow episode, just kind of focusing in on the characters episode. And there's nothing wrong with that. I usually actually enjoy those sort of episodes quite a bit. But this one just felt a little too slow-paced. But right up until the very end, where Carol says, yes, it was her that killed Dave and Karen. Wow. I did not see that coming. Now, I'm just going to assume that Carol's telling the truth here. But if you stop and think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, Rick's little questioning of her there. You'd do anything for the people here. There's nothing you wouldn't do. Carol's had the medical training. At least some, from Herschel. It's not unreasonable to think that she could have figured out what's going on. And Carol had recently had, no wait, that happened afterwards, I'm sorry. Sorry, I completely got my timeline mixed up, but no, Carol had taken on the responsibility of the two little girls, Mika and Lacey. So now she's got two Sophias to protect, along with everybody else. And is there really anything that most people wouldn't do for their kids? So yeah, it actually makes sense that it was Carol. And that's what I really like about it in terms of a good mystery, is it surprises you when you find out what's going on, but in retrospect, it all makes sense. Now granted, they could have thrown a few more clues our way, but still, it's a very well executed moment. And it definitely made me sit up and take notice. And I can't complain whenever a show makes me sit up and take notice in a good way. Anyway, so with that said, let's just sort of talk about a little bit about what's going on with everybody else. Because there's really not a huge advancement, apart from the whole Carol killing people thing, in terms of the major storyline. Now, I do like the conversation that Rick has with Herschel after he gets into that fight with Tyrese. Herschel even describes it as falling off the wagon. And of course, this is Rick dealing with him, kind of succumbing to that anger that he had when he was with Tyrese. Obviously, Rick's going to be a little freaked out about that. He recognizes that as the darker side of his nature coming to the forefront. And as I've said, Rick definitely saw the governor as sort of a dark reflection of himself. And here he is, wailing on Tyrese, a guy who he considers to be a good person. Maybe his friend, even his friend. Now granted, Tyrese is kind of more than a little out of control. But under the circumstances, who can blame him? And nobody knows circumstances like that better than Rick. So yeah, it's understandable that he would feel a little bit freaked out by that. And of course, Rick is also seriously freaking out about not wanting to lose anybody else, given the horrible circumstances. I mean, geez, no wonder he got on Carol's case so badly. But again, her going out there taking those incredible risks, the incredible risk of going out there alone just to deal with water, even though it really probably could have waited one more day. Oh. It's another little piece of evidence for Rick's theory. And speaking of Tyrese, I can't say I was hugely impressed with his story that was going on this episode. Now, when we first see him in this episode, he's just bursting with rage. When Bob goes out to talk to him while Tyrese is digging graves, he's calmed down a little bit, but he's at a cold burn. All it's going to take is one little push to set Tyrese off there. And I like how Bob handles this situation. He tries to reason with him. He realizes, like, okay, I'm just going to have to back off and let this guy do what he needs to do. And then Bob goes and helps dig graves. That gets Tyrese finished up so he can go and get some medical attention that much sooner. And then Tyrese is kind of just looking for some sort of an outlet to pour his feelings into. He doesn't know what to do with himself without Karen. He tries futilely guarding something that doesn't need to be guarded, and thankfully Daryl's able to get through his head and make him realize that. And then when he goes on the run, for a moment he's just in the car there. He's just apparently just sitting there, possibly even just saying, "To hell with it, let the walkers take me." But Bob manages to get through to him, and Tyrese sort of snaps out of it and expends some of that rage on the walkers, showing that, man oh man, is Tyrese not a guy you want to screw with when there's a hammer nearby. Now this all, in my mind, really speaks well of Bob. He's actually, I think, picked up quite a bit as a character this episode. We've seen him being compassionate, we've seen him being logical and reasonable, we've seen him fighting, we've seen him get freaked out fighting the walkers. This is, he might have been a military guy, he might have been a medic in the army, but clearly Bob was not really a combat specialist. You can see during that fight with the walkers when they're escaping that he's just barely keeping it together. So yeah, I'm definitely much more interested in what's going on with Bob as a character. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him. And Tyrese did really make a fairly decent point back at the prison that Rick is more concerned right now with survival than with what's right, with justice. But if everybody's dead, then what's the point of justice, huh? So in that situation, both Rick and Tyrese are right. And that's what makes great conflict, when both people are right. Anyway, let me see here. Michonne. Now, there's still interesting things going on with her. And, once again, Daryl proves to be a really good guy to have just about anybody bounce off of. Daryl can provoke interesting reactions from people, no matter who he's really talking to. Because Daryl's a very insightful guy. One thing I've noticed is that Daryl does seem to have a knack for seeing what's really kind of going on inside of people. It's not something he was always displaying, but that's something I think that's really kind of come to the forefront more recently. But anyways, I like how Daryl is talking to Michonne about how she's really been sort of spending all that time out there hunting around the governor, even though she knows that the trail has gone cold. And I think what's really unspoken there is that this is her way of keeping her distance from the rest of the group. What happened with Andrea had to hurt Michonne pretty badly. So it's not unreasonable to think that maybe she doesn't want to form as tight a bond with anybody else in the group as she did with Andrea, because, well, that all pretty much ended in tears, didn't it? Although, frankly, my tears for Andrea are more along the lines of the fact that TV Andrea ended up being such a poor interpretation of comic book Andrea, where Andrea is my favorite character because she is awesome. Seriously, guys, I love comic book Andrea. Not a fan of TV Andrea. Anyway, speaking of bonds, one thing that we haven't really seen very much of until this episode is the interaction between Maggie and Beth. Even though they're sisters, these two don't really seem to talk very much these days. But this episode was an interesting exception. And we get to see with Beth both that harder side to her nature that's been coming to the forefront that I've talked about in my other reviews this season, and the more vulnerable side. She's not doing quite as well with that hard front as maybe even she'd like to believe. And especially if it comes to her own father being in some possible danger. But then, who can blame her? In a world like the Walking Dead's universe, family's more precious than ever. And losing them, well, that can often be a fate worse than death. Now, I definitely speaking of characters that are interesting to see bounce off each other. We never really have seen very much of Herschel and Carl, and it was very interesting to see these two sort of interact with each other. Seeing Herschel sort of being the like, I'm gonna do what I need to do because it's right. I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna make this choice. I mean, I absolutely love that speech that Herschel gave to Maggie and Rick. This is one of the things that is really great about Herschel as a character. Herschel is an experienced guy. He's a smart guy. He's got a lot of wisdom in life. I've even heard the folks behind the scenes even refer to Herschel as an source of elder wisdom. And, trite as it might be, that is sort of the role that Herschel does fill in here. And he does it very well. But anyway, getting back to him and Carl, it was really kind of interesting to see these two people as they represent very strong contrasts. Herschel being an old fella has lived his life mostly in the world before the change, before the dead rose, and Carl being young is looking forward to spending the rest of his life, however long it might be, in this grim and terrible world. While they're out in the woods, Herschel is able to appreciate the peace of nature. But Carl can't, really. In no time at all, he susses out that there's not one, but two zombies nearby them. But what I also like about this scene is that Herschel even realizes, okay, we've got the one there that's lost its legs, obviously some unfortunate camper that got eaten by zombies who never seem to finish their meal. And the other one is some poor lady who got stuck in a bear trap. So really, neither of these walkers are any real threat to them, and they're able to just walk away peacefully. And Herschel is smart enough and wise enough to recognize that, while Carl was ready to walk over there and kill him. Of course, you could also sort of make the case that he just wanted to put them out of their misery, but that doesn't really seem like that's what was going on with Carl, to me. And frankly, it just seems like at this point, our intrepid band of survivors have very little interest in putting any people who are already walkers out of their misery. It's just not a priority. It's just not a risk worth taking. Why get close to a walker if you don't have to? And even if you do show mercy to one and put it out of its misery, there's 100 more ready to take their place. And other than that, just a couple of little observations. First of all, one, did you notice that Carol actually has a pair of brass knuckles hanging from her belt? Does that really seem like the best choice of weapons to use against a zombie? I mean, I understand a knife, but brass knuckles, you really don't want to be punching zombies. Then again, I guess if you absolutely have to, better to use those than your actual flesh and bone. And also, when Rick saves Carol and gets her back in the prison, he pops through these little holes in the fence. Did you notice that after he gets back in, Rick just kind of walks off and leaves a very visible hole still there? He didn't button it up all the way. Rick, there's zombies right there. They can see that hole in the fence. You really shouldn't have done that. Anyway, guys, that's all I have for you this time around. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Till next time, take care and have a good one.